Lyric poetry is one of the three general categories of poetic literature. It refers to any poem with a single speaker who uses poetry to express either a state of mind or a perception of process. Lyric poems often express profound thought. Through lyric poetry, a poet is able to express feelings and how those feelings affect his or her identity. Lyric poetry encompasses many different types of poetry. Some examples include odes, which are poems of medium length categorized by a serious subject, an elevated style, and an elaborate stanza pattern, as well as elegies, which are poems that mourn the dead. Lyric poems can be strictly structured like sonnets or unstructured like free verse poems. In general, lyric poems are fairly short, have some type of metrical coherence, and express a strong sense of emotion that tells us something about the speaker. These characteristics starkly contrast with the other two categories of poetry. For example, a narrative generally tells a story and its structure will resemble a plotline, whereas a lyric poem would generally focus on how the plotline affects the speaker. Other poems, such as descriptive poems, focus more on the speaker's surroundings. While a descriptive poem might be more outwardly focused, a lyric poem is more inwardly focused. The history of lyric poetry can be grouped into 8 critical periods. It starts with the classical period, where lyric poetry was specifically defined as verse that was sung with a lyre by the ancient Greeks. There were many notable Greek musical poets, which included Sappho, Anacreon, and Alcaeus. The ancient Greek poets influenced many Roman poets such as Catullus. Poetry styles resembling lyrical poetry also made its debut in China, and led to the abandonment of the classic 4-character verses of older styles. Then came the Middle Ages. Lyric at this time simply meant any poem which has been written to music. A lyric poem during this time did not have a particular structure, function, or theme. During the 16th century, Sir Philip Sidney, Edmund Spenser, and most notably William Shakespeare helped popularize sonnets as a lyrical style. It really wasn't until the 17th century until lyric poems started to resemble their modern definition. Poetry from writers such as John Donne and Andrew Marvell helped make lyric the dominant style. Poems also became short and intense in expression. Lyric poetry declined in the 18th century. Even so, lyric poets such as Robert Burns, Thomas Gray, and William Cowper, and Oliver Goldsmith were still popular. In the 19th century, lyrical poetry manages to take the throne once more as the dominant poetic form. The traditional sonnet is revived in Britain, and lyrical poetry also gains popularity in Germany, with poets such as Johann Wolfgang van Goethe and Johann Gottfried Herder gaining popular notoriety. Lyric poetry eventually reached America in the 20th century and eventually led to its modern manifestation today. Today, lyric poetry is still the most common. Most modern poems are also lyric poems, and many famous modern poets write lyric poetry. Lyric poetry also inspires other forms of writing. Lyric novels, which are a type of novel, take many of the elements that categorize lyrical poetry. In a lyrical novel, conventional narration is subordinated in order to give more insight into the feelings of the characters or to set a more fitting mood. The Road by Cormac McCarthy is a very good example of a book that does this. So now that you know what it is, how do you write one? Lyric poems often convey intense emotion, so write about something you feel strongly about. Any themes you use should be specific. If you choose to write about happiness, be sure to convey what type of happiness. Many times, the reader of a lyric poem can glean the feelings of the speaker without the speaker explicitly describing the way they feel. There's also no need to rhyme, although you certainly can. Free verse can be just as lyrical as a more heavily structured poem. However, many good lyric poems do tend to have rhythm and meter. The most common types of meters are iambic, which is 2 syllables with the stressed syllable following the unstressed syllable, trochaic, where the unstressed syllable follows a stressed syllable, anapestic, which is 3 syllables with the first 2 unstressed and the last one stressed, and dactylic, where the first syllable is stressed and the other 2 are unstressed. Now, I'll pass the spotlight over to Liam, who's going to read and analyze a famous poem.
Thanks, Jeff. Please follow along in your handout as I read and analyze Cross by Langston Hughes, written and published in 1926.
My old man's a white old man, and my old mother's black. If ever I cursed my white old man, I'd take my curses back. If ever I cursed my black old mother, and wished she were in hell, I'm sorry for that evil wish, and now I wish her well. My old man died in a fine big house. My ma died in a shack. I wonder where I'm gonna die, being neither white nor black.
First of all, the general shape of the poem is 3 stanzas of 4 lines each. This is called a blues shape, and it is thus a blues poem. Hughes uses an A-B-C-A rhyme scheme in its first two stanzas, but does not rhyme in the last one, as you can see on your sheet. He uses what is called masculine rhymes, which are one-syllable rhymes, such as cat and hat, or swell and fell, as opposed to feminine rhymes, such as falling and calling, or repeat and deplete. The meter is 4 stressed syllables in the first and third lines of a stanza, and 3 stressed syllables in the second and fourth lines. The poem has one speaker who is a genderless individual of half white and half black racial background. Someone who is biracial is called mulatto. Although the term is outdated now, it was used commonly in the 1920s when this poem was written. The speaker could be from almost any time period, as the only possible hint of the temporal location of the poem is in the use of big house. The speaker uses very simple words and simple language, but conveys deep emotional meaning. The meaning of the poem is interpreted in 2 main ways by critics. Some critics say that the dichotomy between the black mother and white father and their social inequality represents the inequality between the white and black races during the 1920s when the poem was written. Other critics say that the poem could be simply about a biracial person who feels as if they have 2 identities, black and white, but is torn down the middle and left with none. That interpretation also includes that the poem is commentary on the lasting effect of slavery on black people, as white slave owners are known to have often taken advantage of their black female slaves, resulting in mulatto children such as the speaker. The title, Cross, could have many connotations. It could represent the anger that the author used to feel towards their parents for making them mulatto, until they forgive them in the poem. Or it could represent the burden of a hybrid racial heritage that the innocent speaker has to carry, just as Jesus had to carry the cross. Additionally, one could see the speaker as at a crossroads between whiteness and blackness, in which the speaker finds themselves. It could also represent the crossing over from anger to forgiveness, or the cross-breed of the speaker. Langston Hughes's Cross is defined as a lyric poem because of its single speaker and because it contains emotions and thoughts rather than actions or descriptions. Now, we'll send it over to Andrew with some more examples of lyric poetry.
Hey guys, we'll look over 3 lyric poems today. The first one is I Am Not One of Those Who Left the Land by Anna Akhmatova. One piece of background knowledge that is necessary for everyone to understand is the fact that the author is from Russia. So in this title, when Akhmatova wrote land, she means Russia. Now, we'll read the poem. I'm not one of those who left their land to the mercy of the enemy. I was deaf to their gross flattery. I won't grant them my songs. But to me, the exile's always wretched, like a convict or a patient. Wanderer, your road is dark, and the bread of strangers tastes bitter. But in the blinding smoke, the flames, destroying the remains of youth, we have refused to evade a single blow against ourselves. And we know that in the final reckoning, each hour will stand justified. No people on earth shed fewer tears, are simpler, or more filled with pride. Alright guys, now we'll go into the elements. So we have 2 elements to check for. The first one is the shortness of the poem. And I mean, we can tell that the poem is short because it's 4 stanzas of 4 lines, and 4 times 4 is 16 lines. And now the second element to check for is emotion. Let's check the first stanza first. We have the first stanza successfully showing disdain, and then the second one showing sympathetic regret. The third one effectively shows sadness, and the last one shows hope and pride. Now we can move on to how structure affects the meaning. So first, we'll talk about the shortness of the poem. The length of the poem contributes to the emotional impact of the poem by making the poem succinct. Now, on to the emotional aspect of the poem. The first stanza shows disdain for the individuals who left Russia. Now, and then the second stanza shows regret for how those who left the land feel. The third stanza shows how much she hates the ruin that Russia is going into. And the last stanza shows contrast from her previous stanza, and it shows the hope for the future of Russia and how proud the people of Russia will be for withstanding this hardship. And we also need to kind of figure out how these combined emotions create a unified impression. And luckily for this poem, it is quite clear that these combined emotions show a pride for Russia. So guys, the second poem is Wealth by Joyce Kilmery. One piece of background knowledge that is needed for everyone to understand this poem is the fact that this author is actually writing to someone. That is why at the beginning there's a little blurb about For Aline. Alright, so let's read the poem together. So at the beginning, like I mentioned previously, there's the For Aline. From what old ballad, or from which rich frame, did you descend to glory? Jeff, I'm gonna try that again. From what old ballad, or from what rich frame, did you descend to glorify the earth? Was it from Chaucer's singing book you came, or did Watteau's small brushes give you birth? Nothing so exquisite as that slight hand could Raphael or Leonardo trace. Nor could the poets know in fairyland the changing wonder of your lyric face. I would possess a host of lovely things, but I am poor and such joys may not be. So God who lifts the poor and humbles kings send loveliness itself to dwell with. Once again, there are two elements to check for. The first one is if the poem is short. The poem is actually quite short. There are only 12 lines, which makes it 4 lines shorter than the previous one. The second element is emotion. The first stanza and second stanza show love. The third stanza shows regret, and the last shows love once more. Now, moving on to how structure affects meaning, we'll first talk about the shortness. The same idea of succinctness and emotional impact apply to this poem. Now on to the emotional aspect of the poem. Both the first and second stanzas are attempting to flirt with Aline. This is evidenced by the numerous amount of cheesy pickup lines that Kilmery is attempting to use. In the third stanza, however, he switches out the feeling into regret by saying that his lack of wealth is stopping him from having nice things. As expected, the third stanza wasn't meant for self-disparaging. It's actually a setup for another bad pickup line. And the punchline is the last stanza. He shows his love by saying that God sent Alina to him. If you haven't picked up... sorry Jeff, I'm going to try that one again. If you haven't picked it up by now, all these emotions combined together create a unified impression of love for Alina.
Now, we'll send it over to Andrew with some more examples of lyric poetry.
I got broads in Atlanta, just to the lean in the credit cards in the scammers, hitting the list in the drama, legacies, found them, wait and see, look like a plan, going out like a Montana, honey killers on the helmets. I got broads in Atlanta, just to the lean in the credit cards in the scammers, hitting the list in the drama, legacies, found them, wait and see, look like a plan, going out like a Montana, honey killers on the helmets, legacies, found them, wait and see,